This is Nitya, and you're listening to Print Action, the podcast. Hello, everyone. I'm Nitya, your host and the editor of Print Action. Today on the podcast, we have Dr. Abhay Sharma, a professor in the Creative School of Toronto Metropolitan University. Abhay attended the Interpack show in Germany earlier this month and will share with us key highlights from the show floor. Hi, Abhay. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Nitya. Glad to be here.
So you were on the ground at Interpack 2026. Now, for listeners who haven't been to the show, could you briefly explain what makes Interpack a bellwether for packaging and processing?
Yeah, so this is one of the big shows, and like Drupa, which concentrates on printing, Interpack concentrates on packaging, and it's really the size of the show that makes it very important, and it's held every 3 years. So this was the show, 7th to the 13th of May, 2026. It was really a focus for people throughout the world internationally to look at packaging.
You mentioned the show is huge. So what did the scale feel like to you, and how were the halls organized?
Wow. So it was all of the halls. So it's a fairground, and there are a number of halls, 14, and each hall could be really quite big, the size of football fields. So the first 3 or 4 halls dealt with confectionery and bakery and chocolates. There were so many chocolates. So it was really processing and packaging for those types of foods. And then there was a focus, there were another 3 halls dedicated to packaging materials. So the material sciences and material products. And then 8A and 8B dealt with labeling and packaging software. So some of the big names in packaging software and label printing. And then there was processing equipment. So halls 11 to 14 dealt with processing equipment, packaging equipment, hardware.
So how many countries participated and how many people attended the show this year?
The actual numbers haven't been published yet. They have to process those swipe cards that they do with the QR code reading. But there were 2,800 exhibitors, and 61 countries were represented. And an interesting statistic is that 95% of the attendees are return attendees. So they have good repetition and a good experience. I think they said nearly 60% of the attendees had done business or made some commercial contracts at the show. And so year to year, or in 3 years' time, nearly 90% repeat business.
That's wonderful. Now, was there a strong Canadian contingent at the show?
There were. I mean, it's a big investment. It's far, and you have to get your staff here. You have to get the booth here. So there were. CCL Label is based in Toronto, their headquarters, and really companies that had an international presence. And so CCL Label, for example, has offices throughout the world. And so it's really their European arm that was at the show. And then interestingly, at the Heidelberg stand was the CEO, Derek Ostap, and he was showing a machine for debossing and packaging called PackSmart. And he's from Ontario, from Concord. So yes, there were a number spaced throughout the whole exhibition from Canada.
So let's now do a quick innovations roundup. So what were some of the new solutions that caught your eye?
Well, of course, we all talk about AI, and that was one of the themes, one of the technology themes was AI. And really, they were demonstrating that it was built in to even things like the control systems. And comparing packaging, you know that we must have nutritional labels, where the barcodes must be correct, etc. So comparing and analyzing labels with AI, with processing and automation, the systems could be smart and intelligent, and so they could predict errors, they could fix errors themselves. So these were some of the innovations with AI.
Were there any other innovation solutions that you wanted to discuss?
Yes, really, it was to do with materials. So many approaches, innovative materials trying to replace our dependence on packaging, trying to see the life cycle of these packaging materials, the shrink sleeves, the poly bags. So really a lot of emphasis on materials and materials research to deal with some of the problems of de-inking and also de-labeling and separating the components of packages. So yes, the innovative materials research was shown everywhere in all of those halls.
That's lovely. So in your recap article, Abhay, you mentioned, and even now earlier you said that AI was talked about in every area at the show, including process engineering and filling. Now, in your view, which AI solutions seemed tangible versus just being a hype? Because we see a lot of hype around AI these days.
Yes, well, something very evident were a number of software solutions that were using AI to compare against the original contract proof and also to detect errors in packages. And so AI could do this a lot quicker and a lot more efficiently than a human could, or trying to compare. So the AI could actually understand the content of a label, could see what language it was in, and actually interpret it and understand it rather than just comparing, are the letters correct or is the spelling correct? So that context-based intelligence was very impressive from the solutions on the floor.
With regards to these AI solutions, specifically for proofreading and inspection, now what problems were they solving when it comes to packaging?
So there are a number of regulations that people were doing it by hand or were providing a proof to check against. So this speeded up this proofreading as we needed to continuously change labels for pharmaceutical or for consumer goods or cosmetics. So there's a lot of small detail that must be changed with different markets and international markets and also changing regulations. So that's where it was indispensable, or early adopters would see benefits from it. And there were some specialized companies that were just focusing on honing this software with AI and intelligence just for that solution.
That's great. So in your recap, which by the way, readers, you can read on Print Action, you mentioned that packaging and packaging waste regulation will be coming into effect in Europe in August, and that it dominated conversations at the show. So what types of materials or solutions were on display at the show as it pertains to this regulation?
Correct. So that was the regulation is PPWR and deals with packaging and packaging waste. And in Europe, separate companies had separate rules, but now under the EU, there's going to be a directive, and this brings into regulations. And I remind us, many in the packaging industry in Canada, Health Canada has a black and white label that you'll start to see in the supermarkets, and it should have come into effect in January, and it's still it's still working its way through the system, but those need to be implemented. The size of that label, where it's positioned, for example, on the Canada label, it must be on the front, not hidden away somewhere. And so regulations like that, as well as what happens to the waste, really govern what must be done. In Canada, for example, it was it's a huge topic for all of our brands and packaging manufacturers and packaging supply chain. And there's a steep fine if you don't adhere to these rules. So if you can think about that across Europe with the different countries, different languages, it is a challenge, as well as the whole life cycle is being considered in Europe. So the waste and the life cycle. So that's really a big implication at the European show.
Oh, yeah, that's true. So before I let you go, Abhay, I want to touch upon, the elephant in the room, tariffs and the geopolitical tensions in the Middle East. I'm sure it must have impacted the show at some level. Can you share some details about, the level of impact?
Yes, I think there's no love lost between the Europeans and Mr. Trump, and that was very evident. People were very frank, but really, apart from emotions and personal views, it was a business case. And so Europeans are subject to tariffs. All the companies with the equipment are subject to tariff. Manufacturers like Heidelberg, or customers for a big printing press or a piece of equipment would wait because these tariffs are on or off. And so they go, why are we going to pay these tariffs in a few months? The mood of the president of the US may change and these tariffs would be off, and they don't want to be, the last person paying 10 or 15 or 20% on equipment. So customers of equipment are waiting. And so then they have that money. The manufacturers aren't getting that. So really, it was a business case. Of course, I have my own personal views on how bad it is, but it was a business case. The tariffs and the uncertainty and the war in Iran were affecting everybody. But in terms of America, there's a similar to Interpack, there's Pack Expo. And the organizers of Pack Expo, so that's a similar big show in the US, are actually working together and signed a contract at the show, MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, to work together in the future shows. So although geopolitically there may not be much alignment with the US, at least in terms of the show, Pack Expo, for those in this industry, and Interpack will be closer aligned in the future.
Seems similar to the agreement that Drupa and Printing United have created, right? In the upcoming Printing United in September, Drupa will be playing a more significant role, is my assumption, though we don't exactly know what sort of a role it's going to be. But I think there's a greater alignment and determination to work closely between the organizers.
Correct. Yes, that sounds exactly the same mirror situation. And don't duplicate it and get resources together.
CCL labels, you mentioned CCL labels. What solutions were they displaying over there?
Quite interesting. They had a beer bottle with a label that would float off at normal warmish temperatures. And so that bottle could immediately be reused and processed rather than it having to go through a washing system for the label removal and then other systems. That was quite an interesting application that was quite time saving. But I can't let you go, Nitya, without mentioning future skills. So as you know, I'm at the Toronto Metropolitan University. We teach printing and packaging, and there was a lot of conversation about the skills that are needed and the workforce, as well as the challenge of AI removing some traditional skills. But yes, the workforce and personnel was an issue and topic of conversation.
So what kind of a conversation? I mean, what was the mood and the tone, and were some solutions discussed? Can you elaborate a little bit on that, Abhay?
Yes, there was a shortage, a general understanding that there's a shortage of young people wanting to work in this industry. And then there's a shortage of particular skills in this AI new generation of skill set. So the industry expressed that they didn't think they had people that were in the right frame of mind, the right technology, the right background in a more technical programming type approach that was needed to work in our industry today.
Okay, I've heard that in the past as well. Industry, they've always spoken about a certain mismatch being between the skills that students graduate with and what's exactly needed in the industry. And I guess AI is making that a little more pronounced.
Exactly, along those lines. Yes, yeah, you nailed it. Yeah. Yes.
Good to know, Abhay. Thank you so much for this chat today.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Nitya.
Bye for now. This has been Print Action, the podcast. Visit printaction.com for more episodes.